I think the differences in prosperity across countries is one of the most fundamental questions facing social science. So it's natural that there are several different theories with different implications for where the origins of these differences come from and what their policy implications are. One of the most popular ones in the media and among some scholars is the geographic explanations, which is that some parts of the world are favored by geography and some other parts are essentially doomed to poverty. And this could be because of climate, it could be because of lack of navigable rivers, it could be because of diseases. I think logically there is nothing wrong with these explanations, but I think empirically they're not very convincing. One way of seeing that is that actually humans have been able to develop fairly sophisticated civilizations in very, very different geographic areas, from deserts to tropics to temperate areas to tundras, and when you look at how the human societies originated, they originated in areas that were much more tropical, either tropical or semi-tropical, relative to where we lived, where the majority of the human population lives today, and even as late as 1500, before the Europeans conquered the rest of the world, many of the most prosperous and most developed civilizations were near the tropics, and so there at least there doesn't seem to have been anything fundamentally preventing those kind of civilized societies to have emerged in the tropics. Now, of course, one can say that things have changed since then, and somehow what was not a barrier to economic development in 500 years ago has become a barrier to economic development today. But I think that's also not a very convincing explanation, because if you think about it, what could be these geographic barriers to development? Most likely they're going to be related to agriculture. Something like intellectual activity or manufacturing you can do more easily in a variety of circumstances, whereas agriculture, that's going to be very much dependent on soil, climate, and things like that. But the major driver of economic growth over the past 200-300 years, over the past 500 years, has been commerce and industrialization. So if there was any kind of disadvantage to the tropical areas, it should have shown up itself in the 500 years, before the 500 years that started the modern era. Whereas in contrast, we see that those areas were relatively prosperous in 1500, even in 1600, but they started kind of losing that edge over the past 200, 300 years. Similarly, culture obviously plays a very important role, and one can clearly find an empirical association between important cultural traits and development. So you'll go to a country that has an economically functioning market system, and people will have attitudes that are in line with the market institutions. On the other hand, you go to a country which is living under dictatorship. The markets don't work. There are no public services, and the cultural attitudes will have been adapted to that. And there's no doubt that those cultural traits are in some sense part of the equilibrium. They're supporting the specific social structures that are in place. However, I think those cultural traits are essentially adaptations to the environment that these people are living under. There is nothing culturally fixed that prevents a society from kind of taking the leap towards industrialization, towards economic growth. So many of the cultural theories would be associated with things like, there will be a particular type of culture, say the Chinese culture or the Protestant ethic, that would be the engine of economic growth, or there would be what facilitates economic growth, and there will be other characteristics like the Muslim religion or the Catholic faith or the Iberian culture that would be a barrier to economic growth. I think the evidence, again, is not very consistent with these views. The evidence is certainly consistent that the trust that people have in others, the trust that people have in markets, are very important in understanding how market institutions develop, how trade develops, but it's not consistent with the view that these cultural characteristics are immutable and are the basic driver of the beginning of economic growth or how it evolves over time.